right. Well, first, my name's Cora Akma. I am the Dairy Production Director for the ADSA Graduate Student Division. And I wanted to thank you all for being here today and coming to our September webinar. Today we have Dr. Cassie Jones from the Department of Animal Science and Industry at Kansas State University. And she's going to be speaking to us today about effective scientific posters and presentations. So, Dr. Jones, you can take it away.
All right, well, thanks guys, and it's my pleasure to visit with you today and talk about some things that I figured out along the way on what works and what certainly doesn't work as we think about scientific posters and presentations. And so I know that the chat box is open, and so as you have questions, go ahead and put them into the chat box and we'll cover those toward the end. All right, so one of the first questions that you have as you're creating a poster is always, is this a physical or is this going to be an e-poster? And in the year of COVID, it seems that everything's moving to e-posters. I work on the animal science side, and so I'm a swine nutritionist by training, but we were very much ingrained in the kind of conventional 4-foot by 3-foot physical posters for years and years and years, really until we had to move to an e-poster format. And so really there's valuable parts on both sides. And usually when you're looking at submitting your poster or working on a poster or presentation, you probably don't get to choose whether it's going to be a physical poster or an e-poster. It's really probably up to the symposium or the place where you're going to be presenting it. And so there are some advantages to one versus the other, but I'm going to talk through both of them today, and I'm going to start with the physical poster aspects. A lot of what would be on a physical poster, of course, is similar to an e-poster, and then I have toward the end some specific considerations for e-posters. And so we'll start with these physical posters and just poster designations in general. And I always suggest starting with the format. And so I looked up the ADSA physical poster format for their annual meeting prior to its virtual format. And all of their physical posters were actually pretty flexible. It said that they needed that the poster board was 48 inches high and 96 inches wide, and you just needed a poster that would fit somewhere on that. So usually we see these being about 48 inches high and 36 inches wide. One of my biggest recommendations is figure out your poster size right away. The first thing you do is set your slide size within PowerPoint or whatever format or processing system that you're utilizing to make your poster. Make your dimensions the very first thing that you do. I can't tell you how many students I've had who put so much time and effort into getting their content, but also all the formatting right, only to realize that they designed this entire poster on like a 3-inch by 4-inch slide. And so now they have to go back and reformat everything. And so make sure that you change your slide size to match what is really matched up or required within the format of the poster itself. We always use metric units as a scientific presentation. And for our Dairy Science Society, as well as for ASAS, there are some specific things that we really encourage students to do, and that is to include your abstract number, as well as the title, authors, and affiliations. Usually I see people do a good job of titles, authors, and affiliations, but very rarely now do I actually see abstract numbers. When you're looking at a physical poster and maybe there's a room full and there's several hundred physical posters within that room at a conference, having that abstract number is so helpful as someone who's just interested in going to find a specific abstract, so that I know, okay, this is one that I had flagged ahead of time, and this is really where what the poster that I had found previously. Also that abstract number and all the title, we want those to have lettering that's at least 1 inch. And so typically we're going to have size 96 font or greater. And then it's also really handy, it's not required, but I really do recommend a picture of yourself near the abstract number. And that's only in the case of something like a physical poster. And that's because as you think about how physical posters are used at conferences, in many cases they're put up and you stand by that poster for a period of time but it's up for maybe the duration of the entire meeting. And that way, if someone's really interested in your poster, but maybe they've missed the presentation time, or they find it after the presentation time is over, that they can maybe seek you out or say, oh, hey, I saw your picture on this. The other thing is that it avoids a little bit when you're looking through posters and trying to get more information about one during the poster session itself, having the picture of who is the presenter kind of avoids some of those awkward conversations. If there's 2 or 3 people who are standing beside a poster saying, okay, which one of you is this author? You can just approach that person and say, hey, I have some questions about your research. So let's talk through the major components of research posters. And this is just the major components of a physical poster. But again, these would be the exact same components for an e-poster. So the first part, after you have your title and your authors and your affiliations, would be the why. And in this case, it's really, that's your introduction. And so why did we do this research? I always tell my students this is an important thing to establish that research gap, so that you're really establishing what's been done in the field, what hasn't been done, and why is this relevant? Why is this specific objective relevant for us to be studying next? And so typically we handle that introduction in somewhere between 3 to 5 bullet points. And it's really establishing why the research is important and establishing that research gap. Next is our what. What are we doing? And that's the objective. It's important to clearly state that. You can see in this poster, I have an entire separate section for the objective. Sometimes people will put this as the last bullet point of the introduction. I really do encourage you to have a separate objective section, or at least bolded, or have some type of signification, way of signifying that this is really a key important part. And then finally, the how. So you're at why, what, and how. And the how is the materials and methods. And so in this one, you can see we have some experimental design aspects and then other individual or other materials and methods. This is where it's important to lay out, again, in kind of a bullet point format, what are the very 20,000-foot view, high-level points on experimental design. What are the specific treatments? I really like this poster because it lays out what are those treatments in treatment 1 through treatment 6 in a very clear manner, and they're bolded, so your eye kind of focuses on those. And then also, what is the experimental unit? Then we have some basic collection details. Sometimes people, in my opinion, go a bit overboard here. I tend to hit the really high points. Again, here we're talking about a pig trial that's in this example, and we weighed pigs and weighed feeders, but we don't talk about what specific scale, and we don't talk about all of the individual aspects of which assays and which types of things. I'm physically there during the poster. And so if there are questions, they can always follow up with that. And that's one of the bigger differences between maybe a poster presentation and an oral presentation, and certainly compared to a written manuscript, is that we just spend less time on the methods. And if people have specific questions about those methods, then they can follow up by asking. And so instead, we hit the high points of what are the basic collection details, like what are the age of the animals, what data was collected and when. And then finally, just a brief statement about statistics, and only enough to make it relevant to be able to understand how to interpret the data. Then what's next is results. And you can see on this poster, the results section takes up, about 2/3 of the poster, if not 75% of the poster. That's really what the key aspect is of this poster and within a presentation, is really trying to communicate those results. Again, that's different than if we were writing a manuscript. In a manuscript form, sometimes those materials and methods take up more space, more time than what the results themselves do. And so in this case, we really spend quite a bit of time displaying those results and what happened. And then we have the so what are the conclusions for our study, and then any relevant sponsors, acknowledgement, references perhaps that you added within the introduction, those can be stuck in the bottom. And so you can see this poster lays out really nicely from the top left-hand corner, and then it's laid out kind of in these 2 different columns. And so it's top left-hand corner and flows well with your eye so that you can naturally read it to your bottom right-hand corner. So some basic recommendations, and I have several examples of posters for you, and I like to show these. These are real poster examples. I teach a class on undergraduate research at K-State, and so we have about 40 students every semester who are conducting undergraduate research, and I get to help them lay out their very first poster ever. And usually we're conducting research on the same research project, and students will have the same data set and will be challenged to present or create their own poster independently. And so that's actually, this is all the same data that I have been showing you previously, and it's just students' different versions, different ways of laying that exact same data, that exact same research project out to show you some style differences. So because in order to protect the names of the guilty and those that I'm acclaiming today, I have blocked out their names in this kind of blue bar, but I have gotten permission from all of these students to utilize their work as an example. Okay, so my basic recommendations on physical posters is to be really careful with the use of white space. It's something that we probably don't talk enough about. The previous poster that I showed you here, I'll flip back to it real quick, you can see again, it's laid out in kind of two columns, and there's a nice use of white. And so the area that is white, or is kind of the blank area, is natural, and we have very clear alignment within each of those sections. These two posters, whether they're laid out in the similar format here on the left, where there are two columns again, you can see in that case, the student probably didn't spend very much time formatting those two charts. The charts are really small. The bars are a very different size compared to the font describing that. And then there's some awkward white spaces. Comparatively to the poster that's on the right, this is, again, the exact same data. This student chose to display it graphically in three different columns. And again, it's probably not my favorite use of white space, because I think that some of their columns got a bit scrunched. I'd like there to be a little bit more white space there, but certainly it uses the space much more efficiently than what we see on the poster on the left. And so just be thoughtful about white space. Have a logical place for your eye to rest. So as your eye is looking at these two posters, it's immediately drawn to the results, those charts on the left. And on the right, I would actually say that it's drawn to that picture of nursery pigs and to the charts that are toward the bottom. And then again, choose 2 or 3 columns. It's really, I play around with it when I set posters up for the first time based on how many charts I have, how many graphs I have, how many data tables, how extensive my materials and methods need to be in order to present the data well. Usually I have either 2 or 3 columns, and I'll show you some examples of great posters that have both. The other aspect that I think it's important to talk about would be text. And I really encourage students to use bulleted phrases instead of full sentences. Both of these posters are great posters in general. They're formatted a little bit differently, but what drives me crazy about both of them is that they have big blocks of text. And so if you can imagine yourself walking through a sea of scientific posters, it takes a long time to look at each of these posters and figure out what happened, what were the treatments, how did they do it, what was even the objective. And so that's really why we tend to use and encourage the use of bulleted phrases. There's just not much space on posters. And so whenever we can eliminate filler words like of and the and all of those extra things that are necessary when we write in full sentences or in full paragraphs, it really cleans up the poster and allows more white space and for you to really focus on what you need to. I also encourage concise and numbered lists. And so, for example, if there are 6 treatments, clearly laying out what those 6 treatments are in the materials and methods with 1, and then the first treatment, 2, and then the second treatment. Students sometimes think that's overkill. But again, we see our data constantly. We see our data too much by the time that we present it for the very first time. Our job is to be able to clearly communicate it to someone as they're walking past or within 30 to 45 seconds. And so it's important for people to have that laid out and have those bulleted or numbered lists as much as possible. I also encourage students to pick one block text font and stick with it. And so have one type of font for your titles and kind of your headers, and then you can choose a different type of font for your text, but don't go back and forth between different text formats. And then also be careful about capitalization. Just be consistent with it in terms of capitalizing proper nouns, or are you going to be capitalizing every word within your title? And so just making sure that we're consistent with capitalization of words throughout your poster. This is a personal pet peeve of mine, but colors tend to drive me a little bit crazy. And so I have a couple examples of different color uses here in these posters that are on the right. I always encourage you to have font that's either black or at least very, very dark. So you know my slides here are kind of an obnoxious K-State purple, no apologies. I work for K-State. We all have kind of that college level enthusiasm. And so I always have purple on my posters. And you can see most of my students do too. We encourage that. But I never have purple font on my posters. And that's because purple on white is just, most of the time it's too light. And so usually we have either a black font or a very dark font, like maybe a very, very dark purple or a very, very dark blue. I got my PhD at Iowa State University. Their color was cardinal red and gold. I would always use black. And I think some of my colleagues would use that cardinal red on white, and it's really difficult to see and to read that cardinal red on white or even that yellow on cardinal red. And so I like to have either a solid white or a light background and then a black or very dark font. You can see in these that we do employ sometimes some interesting things for the background. And so it's pretty common for our students to have a wildcat washed out behind the graphs or on the background of the poster. Sometimes I like that. In the one that's on the lower left, I actually don't. They already have so many colors going on here that I think that it just adds extra busyness. And so because of that, I think that it would clean this poster up quite a bit if we removed that PowerCat background and didn't have a background in it at all. Now, as you're thinking about specific colors for charts, you can see that these two authors used very different or made very different decisions about colors for their charts. Whenever I have a titration design, meaning that I have like increasing levels of something, so like maybe I have increasing levels of calcium in a diet, and those are my treatments, I tend to use various gradients. And so I kind of like that where the person that's on the top, this was replacing soybean meal with distiller's grains. And so there were increasing levels of distiller's grains. And as the treatments had more and more of that product in it, they got a darker shade of that same color. And so I really like that of having gradients for different titrations. So maybe a light blue, a moderate blue, and a dark blue. But we have to make sure that we have very clear color differences between those treatments. And in my opinion, these are too similar of blues. It's really difficult for the eye to see clearly between those treatments and those results charts. I'm someone who tends to use a red bar for a negative control and a green bar for a positive control. I've had feedback from others that they think that that ends up making it look a bit Christmassy. And again, usually I have quite a bit of purple on my poster. And so red, green, and purple tend to make a bit of chaos at times. And so you have to use them strategically. But I do tend to group my treatments by color. And so, for example, if I have a negative control, a positive control, and then maybe I have 3 different levels of a product, I would maybe use red for 0 I would use my positive control, maybe it's an antibiotic, I would have as green, and then I would have a light purple, moderate purple, dark purple. And so I tend to group those treatments by color so that they're logically designed. I'm someone who really likes charts to be laid out in black. And so neither of these have that, but the bars themselves, I think, pop off of a white background if those individual bars have a black outline around them. And then just be careful about bar spacing. I can criticize both of these. I certainly think that the top poster, there should be more space between each of the bars. I think that they bleed into one another. It makes it worse because of the color selection choices. But as we look toward the bottom, I actually think that especially the bottom two charts could have wider bar spaces or bars and narrower spaces between those bars. I also don't love the very top two charts of this bottom right-hand corner. I think that they just tried to do too much. There's too many response criteria on there. It got busy as they tried to use all these different colors. And so in this case, I would prefer that they had one bar color, or really I questioned, is all of that information necessary? Perhaps we could have replaced that either with a table. If we thought that we needed all 8 response criteria and all 6 treatments, we probably could have cleaned up how that looked. And then finally, never use shadowing. Sometimes I'll see people use the shadowing feature within each of these boxes, and that makes it really difficult. Again, those bars don't pop off of that white background very well. Then it's hard to see on the y-axis. Is that 35 or is it 33? Because the bar goes up to maybe 33, but then the shadow bleeds up to 35. And so it's difficult to always tell those bars. And I especially like to have SEM bars on my mean bars, on my treatment bars. And so I think that bleeds into the SEM bars if we have shadowing. All right, now let's talk a little bit about data and the best ways to describe and show data. You can see that I tend to use quite a bit of charts in my posters. I certainly also do in my oral presentations, but there's always a trade-off. The trade-off is that charts are much easier to understand and interpret. Tables, though, are a much more efficient use of space to convey information. And so if I have data that I think is the most important data, maybe I feel that I have, maybe I have 20 different response criteria within my research project. And I think that I need to show 10 different forms of 10 different response criteria, because that's really the most important part of the story given my time frame. But of those 10, maybe 3 are the most important, and the other 7 help support those other 3 are kind of my conclusions or my interpretations. In that case, I make charts out of the 3 most important data points, those most important response criteria. And then the rest, if it fits together well, and depending upon time, I might make the other 7 response criteria into a table. And so here I just have different examples. Here you can see the bottom left-hand corner. This is one where there were 7, or where there were 3 response criteria that were in chart format, and then they had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 that were displayed in a table format. We certainly would not be able to efficiently fit 10 different charts onto a poster like this, and if we did, it would really lose its impact. And so I think that the table on the left, or the presentation, the poster on the left, does a nice job kind of playing around with, here are the 3 most important aspects, the 3 most important response criteria, but then here we still have a fair amount of other data demonstrated. The one on the right does not have as nice a formatting in it. You can see they had 1 primary chart and then lots and lots of response criteria and presentation and treatments and others. And so I think that this just shows you that good tables can be done and very useful and be used well. But they're also, if those tables aren't formatted properly, you do lose quite a bit of value. One of the things, if I have tables that I'm planning to talk and refer to, I tend to use red or a highlighted box or even like a red circle around that data point to really draw attention to a specific cell that I think is most important. And so if I think that that's necessary, so that again, your eye is drawn to a specific area, I try to use formatting as best as I can. All right, as we think about data, always make sure that you have p-values. So every single response criteria should have statistics associated with it. I also require my students to put SEM bars on each of their means. I think that it more efficiently demonstrates variability amongst that mean, but I certainly have colleagues who just use a pooled SEM underneath the p-value, and that's okay. But I think it's important for us as scientists to display that and be transparent in both our SEM and p-value. And then things that I see get missed a lot would be axes, labels, and units. You know your data, you know what that chart is referring to, but oftentimes those are things that we miss. And then when we're trying to refer to it or someone's looking at that data for the first time, it's difficult for them to interpret. Finally, less is more. Focus on what is most important. And so you can see both of these posters focused on 10 different response criteria to more or less success. Most of the posters that I put together actually have about 4 or 5 response criteria that I show at all. And so there are several ones that I think maybe do the best job by having fewer response criteria that they're showing. If something does not have significant differences, and its finding is not that substantial to the contribution of what this science might make, those are things that need to be discussed verbally perhaps, and certainly in a manuscript, but not in a few-minute presentation within a poster. Another thing that I see mistakes made a lot with would be pictures. Make sure if you're going to use pictures, which I love, I always recommend pictures as much as possible, but make sure that those pictures are very high resolution. And so the best way to do that is to actually make sure that you look at your poster at 100% screen size. Oftentimes, again, students are looking at their poster as a whole slide on their computer screen, and they never go up, so it's like 40% or sometimes it's 20% of the slide size. And so always go up to 100% before you push print, and make sure that when that picture that looks crystal clear on your, here I'll show you, this one that looks crystal clear when it's on this poster, that when it's blown up to 100%, it actually gets very fuzzy. That way you avoid any potential disappointments when you are printing these posters, because it's typically $80 to $100 to print a poster physically. And then finally, if you're going to use pictures, make sure that they're relevant, that they're clear, and that they're actually useful. Sometimes students will add a picture of a pig in the corner for just kind of some added interest or to make a poster layout nicer, and I have no problem with that as long as it's not a poster about a dairy cow or about dairy research. If so, why is there a picture of a pig on here? I also sometimes question, you know, this poster on the left has a really nice use of colors, has a really nice use of pictures, but boy, there's a lot of pictures on there, so many that there's not really much room for results or discussion, and they're pretty straightforward, simple pictures. And so did we need the picture of all of these different colors in the cups, as well as on the plate, as well as in the microfuge tubes? And so are all 3 of those pictures necessary? So that said, like I said, I kind of have the good, bad, and the ugly for you now. And so this is Kara. She's now a county agent for us after doing an undergraduate research project. And so I like to hold hers up, not because it's the perfect poster ever, but I just think that she did a nice job with color use. After talking through those things, you can see her introduction is in sentences instead of bullets. I would pick that apart. But I like how she's laid out her treatments down in her experimental design. So down here, it's very easy for us to tell what those treatments were. And then as she looked at those results, we have 5 different response criteria being shown. So we have average daily gain during the treatment period, feed intake during the treatment period, and then overall average daily gain, feed intake, and feed efficiency. I could criticize a little bit that her chart colors, her bar colors are a bit Easter egg-like, right? They get a bit pastel. However, I like that the control is red. This is an antibiotic replacement project, and so they have positive controls as green, so zinc oxide or carbidox, which is a medication that we can add to swine feed, is in green. And then we had 3 different types of antibiotic replacements that we were testing against the green. And so she has those as light purple, moderate purple, and dark purple. And so I think that those are nice ways. I also really like that she has superscripts on hers. I like her bar width and her space between those bars. I think that the eye just rests really nicely on these. And then she has, again, I can criticize a bit on the conclusions. Her conclusions really just repeated what the results say. So I wish that she would combine her conclusions and future directions into a single section and really focus more on interpretations instead of just regurgitating what the charts say up above. All right, here's another really nice poster. I left the names on those that I thought did a nice job. This is the same data set, but it's in three columns instead of 2. You can see Jamie did a really nice job with pictures in the top right-hand corner. She was trying to lay out different things, and so instead of having 5 response criteria shown, she's only showing 3 here. And so she went back and forth on whether she should have 4 charts or 3 charts, and she decided to go with 3 charts, but then have 3 different pictures. And I think that it makes for a pretty nice overall layout. Again, my criticism would be I don't like that these charts have kind of the boxes around the outside of them. I think that that's maybe a bit distracting. But that said, there's also so little white space on here that I think they're necessary in this case. If I were to be super picky, I would make these experimental diets and their treatments, I would make them a little bit narrower or smaller. Seems to be a strange size. This is a larger size text with different spacing than what we see in the introduction, which should be bulleted, or the objective and experimental procedures. And so she could save some space there, which would allow her to make this first column a little bit narrower. And if she did that, then she could actually make or offset each of these different charts and offset them in a different way so that perhaps they didn't need to be on top of one another or overlap so much. And so, yeah, I know that's getting picky. Again, I really like this poster in general. Okay, here's one, same data set that is very similar. This person chose to look at 4 response criteria. I really don't love how they have their SEM bars overlaying and actually interfering with their means. This one, you can't even see the mean because the mean number that's written there is in black, and it's on either a black bar or a very dark colored bar. And then there's really no rhyme or reason to the different colors of bars. So why is this one teal and this one's orange? There really is not really a rhyme or reason, again, for why those bars are that color. This student did a nice job of being a bit more creative. And so they used a different style, a little bit different approach, and they were able to cram a ton of response criteria on and a ton of pictures. And that's my biggest criticism, is that they just tried to do too much. As you take an initial look at this, your eye doesn't really have a natural place to rest. I also think the way that they laid these results out was a bit odd. Usually in science, we lay results out by response criteria. This person laid them out by treatment. And so they said, this is my control, and this was their body weight on day 0, day 7, day 14, and day 19 and day 35. And then this is my zinc oxide, and these were the results. Where typically we have on day 0, this was my control, this was zinc oxide, this was carbidox. And so I think that it's just a bit difficult to interpret based on how we normally lay things out. Not very good use of white space at all. And so they just tried to do so much that you can see even on this treatment average daily gain and overall average daily gain, the y-axes weren't set well. And so it makes it hard from certainly on the computer screen, but even 3 or 4 feet away to really be able to clearly see differences among those treatments. I am glad that given all of the content that she put on here, that at least all those bars are the same color. In this case, I would not go with different colored bars. I think there's already too much going on. That's also something that I think if she had not used this titration kind of different color of these bar titles or headers, that might have cleaned this poster up a little bit. Here's another one, same data set here. This is laid out in 3 different columns. I like how they laid out kind of the different phases and what happened within the experiment. And they really did a nice job of laying out the different treatments pretty clearly. But here we have dark bars on top of a dark background. And they're trying to show 6 different response criteria. It just got really small. Those results got really small. Again, as we look at the scope of those results, they take up maybe 25% of the poster. We want them to take up at least 2/3 of the poster. And so there's just too much space spent on experimental procedures and other information on this poster. Here's another one that used a combination of table and charts. I just would like the table certainly to be laid out with different colors and be centered, and then for there to be different colors and certainly space between the bars on these charts. And then just to go totally in a different direction, this is a different project altogether, but this student did a really nice poster from our diagnostic medicine pathobiology. This is a vet school type poster that's very typical of our vet school. And so they used a light blue background. I don't really know why. Light blue isn't a school color of ours. Maybe it was to stand out and look a bit different. I don't have a problem with the light blue per se, but I do think the introduction got really, really heavy. It's a full paragraph, and the pictures are phenomenal on this. And so I wish that there had maybe been a bulleted introduction so that they could make those pictures a bit bigger. Certainly, as you look at the results, they're very small. And so just formatting this one a little bit differently would be helpful. This is a different format of a poster, and I actually really like this one. This is from our Meat Science program. I would call this one a good poster. I don't love that there are kind of these different colored bars again. They don't really represent anything in particular. In this case, these are 4 treatments of prime, top choice, low choice, and select, and so just various quality grades. My preference would be that those were maybe gradations or of the same color. But that said, I think that the layout of this one is pretty nice and clean. And then this is just a different poster altogether. And so I wanted you to see an example of maybe what are the new or modern type of posters that we see. And so this is one that can have an area for you to scan. And so they can, if you're not physically there beside the poster, there are some unique features so that you can learn more about that poster as well. All right, now, most of those things apply to an e-poster format, and so I'm not going to spend tons of time on this section because the same context, the same things seem to apply. Again, though, if you're doing an e-poster, start with the format. And so most presentation formats now require you to be in a 16:9 ratio in landscape orientation. Just be consistent and make sure you know if you need to be in a 4:3 or a 16:9 ratio for your slides. That's pretty important as you think about how those slides are shared during that e-poster. Font size in an e-poster should be 28 or greater, again, using metric units. And then there's a function on looping that I encourage you to click. Most conferences will require that. That way you don't have to sit there and physically click through your poster. You can if you're standing there, but it will naturally loop through your poster from beginning to end as you present or as it's there. An e-poster, these are kind of the base formats of it. You would start with an abstract. And so your abstract is actually, you have room to copy and paste your abstract into it. Again, you have room here for your title, your name, and I encourage you to have your title, name, and abstract number and affiliations on every single slide. And then what changes is the content within it. And so then you have a slide for the introduction and the objective, a slide for methods, and sometimes people will have 2 or 3 slides for their methods. Again, I think that this one's nice because it lays numerically out what those methods were and what those treatments were. This one gets a bit wordy on me though, and so I would have at least broken this into 2 slides, if not 3. And then finally, your results. And so again, I personally would have broken this into 3 separate slides, 1 slide for each of the results that Olivia was wanting to share, but I don't think that it's bad to have them in this format. It just got a bit busy. And then finally, we have acknowledgments or conclusions and acknowledgments. So it's a very similar poster format, the content is very similar. The formatting just changes a bit. Some additional e-poster recommendations, things just for e-posters, is think about where your navigation bars are located so that they're not distracting. And so that one that Olivia showed had navigation bars on the left. The downside of that is that you're not using the entire width of the slide. This is another poster, e-poster slide that I have here on the bottom right, and you can see actually their text ran into their navigation bars at the bottom. And so just be careful about where those navigation bars are placed and so that they're not distracting. I love using animations in presentations, and when I'm giving an oral presentation, I almost always use animations. But in e-posters, you really shouldn't, because again, they're meant to loop continuously. And so it changes how we present a little bit. And so I tend to not use animations when I create an e-poster. There are nice things about e-posters, like you can embed some links, but if you're going to embed those links, make sure that they're intuitive and they provide value. Meaning if they want to see maybe a statistical model, and you're developing a project that has a statistical model, having a link to that modeling website would be kind of a neat thing for people to be able to play with. Sometimes I'll see people trying a bit too hard with e-posters, and they're hyperlinking all of their references and their introduction or different things, and that just gets a bit too busy in my opinion. And then finally, again, make sure each slide contains your abstract number, the title, and the authors. You can see that in Olivia's. That way, as they're cycling through, whether they're on the results slide or the introduction slide, someone else who might be walking past or joining a presentation can see this is this presentation and this is who's presenting it. When we're presenting posters in person, I encourage students to practice those posters. So practice what you're going to say, how you're going to say it, and really to stay within your time limits. Sometimes I get a bit rambly. And so if I know that I have about 3 minutes I'm targeting or 5 minutes that I'm targeting, I have to practice to make sure that I'm saying and speaking in the right depth of information so that I reach that target time. Always bring an extra copy of a flash drive, even if you upload it. Even if this is an e-poster and you've uploaded it, always bring an extra copy just in case you get there and the upload didn't work or something crashes. Arrive 10 or 15 minutes early to check that your poster works accurately, that all of those links work, and that your buttons work to one another. Sometimes I have students that struggle with talking loud enough. Usually poster sessions are loud places. There are people having side conversations. There's typically laughter. People are drinking coffee and having a chat. And so if you're presenting or discussing your data, talk maybe a bit louder than what you're comfortable with. Make sure that whoever you're talking to can very clearly hear you. Make sure that you refer to your poster, but not too much. I know that that's a kind of a strange thing to say, but I really encourage you to use your finger, point to the charts, point to specific bars or specific cells of a table that you're referring to, but don't just read off your poster. Be making eye contact. Use your poster as a reference, but don't read your poster to them. Really use it as a basis for communication and for a conversation. Finally, be flexible. Sometimes students, especially my undergrads or my early master students, get a bit nervous, and so they tend to over-prepare and have a spiel, have their speech ready, and then they get a bit agitated when someone interrupts them with a question. Try to not do that. Try to be flexible and make it conversational and prepare with questions as best you can. And so to do that, usually I work with my major professor, with peers, people that know my research, people that don't know my research. And if I can answer their questions, it's usually a pretty good bet that I can answer almost any of the other questions that are going to be coming up during the session. Last slide for you today. I know that a number of you are now in a virtual format where we're recording presentations. And so there are some good and bad things with having presentations recorded. The nice thing is that you can practice to be fluent and, again, stay within your time limit. But where I see students sometimes going with this is that they'll actually type out a script and then they'll just read a script into their slides. And you can tell so obviously that they're speaking from a script. Their voice inflection is not natural. It's not like they're having a conversation with you or telling a story to you. Instead, it's very rigid. And so I really encourage students to not read directly off of a script when you're working on a recorded presentation, and accept, maybe even embrace, minor verbal flaws. Sometimes it can get a bit tempting when you're recording to be perfect in your presentation and your dictation and not have any errors. If you have an in there, if you have an or you pause a little bit, I would let that happen. Keep it conversational. Try to embrace those minor flaws. It makes it much easier to listen to than a very rehearsed and recorded presentation. Right now, I'm using a headset with a microphone. I work in an office environment where I can close my door and record relatively quietly, but just in order to have the best type of sound quality, I have really, it looks like a pop star microphone that's coming off of the side of my headset. Make sure that you're recording in something that has good sound quality. I like to record in Zoom or WebEx or Camtasia. The sound quality is typically better than in PowerPoint. I also like to use my pointer. You can see I've done that a couple of times in this presentation in a logical, strategic manner. Don't sit there, and this kind of becomes a nervous habit of people who sometimes sit there and point to things, and then sometimes as they're talking, they'll leave it there and they're talking about a different place, but that pointer is sitting there located in a different form. And so just be logical and strategic about pointer use. When you're not using it, pull it off to the side so that it's not distracting. I like to include my contact information. Again, if this is recorded, it's helpful for people to know, hey, if I have a question, I can email you here, and then be prompt with your responses. And so if I know that I have a recorded presentation, I actually have one coming up on Monday. I recorded that presentation about a month ago, but I know that it's going to be shown on Monday. And so I've blocked off 2 hours after the presentation is set to be released and set to be shown in a presentation format so that I can respond to emails that might come in during that time. I like to listen to my recording and re-record it until I'm satisfied. Again, try not to get overly rehearsed in that though. So accept some minor verbal flaws. Upload and confirm the uploaded file is correct. I can't tell you how many times I've had students who have uploaded a file and it was the wrong version or it didn't have the recording on it. And so always re-download what you uploaded to make sure it is the correct file and everything sounds correct. And then again, be responsive to questions. And so leave time, like I tried to do here with you guys, and leave time for questions if you've been indicated to do so. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. I'm happy to share this presentation with you if you'd like to see some of these examples and you'd like the slide set. Just shoot me an email. Otherwise, I will open up for any questions that you guys might have. So feel free to type anything into the chat.
So it doesn't seem like we have any questions popping in. So I wanted to thank everybody that came today and listened to Dr. Jones. And thank you so much for coming in and presenting to us. I really appreciate it. And the rest of the division probably appreciates it as well. I thought it was really informative. And for me, the visuals helped a lot. Just kind of seeing what different preferences are and what really looks great on a poster, and some of the things that you wouldn't necessarily really pick up at first that you drew attention towards. So I really appreciate that. But yep, if anybody has any questions after the fact, feel free to email me or get a hold of me on the Facebook page, or you can get a hold of Dr. Jones directly. But other than that, I think that is it.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great evening.